Hi, cheese friends! Welcome to this terrific evening hosted by Girls Night In Online. I'm really excited to be with you all. Can everybody hear me? Okay, cool. So for people who don't know, my name is Julia Birnbaum. I use she, her pronouns. I am the founder of Philly Cheese School. Philly Cheese School is a Philly-based, women-run, queer-owned cheese academy offering cheese classes and cheese experiences, cheese consultation, anything you need in a cheesy variety, offering that cheesy, excellent knowledge for you. I am here tonight to teach you a very fun class on cheese, and specifically cheese from all around the world. I have been a cheesemonger, which is a person who sells and knows pretty much everything about cheese. For a number of years now. I have worked in social media, I have done cheese education, other cheese marketing jobs, and I have done on-the-counter mongering, so selling to the customer. I actually ran one of the largest counters on the East Coast. And so I'm excited to bring all of this cheesy knowledge to you tonight. If you are feeling generous and feisty, feel free to head over to Venmo and drop me a little tip. My Venmo is my name with an underscore in the middle, Julia_BIRNBAUM. And I would appreciate that. So yeah, thanks for joining us. The way that this is run is I'm going to talk a lot about cheese and I'm actually going to show you some amazing cheeses that I want you guys to get to know. So let's get right into it here. I have prepared for you tonight a plate of some of my favorite cheeses from around the world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where they're from. I'm going to talk a lot about the cheese and a little bit about how to shop for cheeses like this, if you like cheeses like this, and hopefully give you maybe even some tips on pairing. So jumping right into it, the first cheese that we all saw on our list is Kassadica. Kassadica de Bufala looks a lot like this. I have it here. This is you can see, so it's a little bit soft and squishy. It's kind of like, it's pliable, so it's not quite spreadable. You can kind of like pull it apart like this. And this is a buffalo milk cheese. So it is made from the milk of the water buffalo. This is an animal that is, it comes out of a lot of Asian areas. Back in the Middle Ages, there was a lot of kind of trade happening between these Asian areas and Europe due to the spice trade. And what we ended up with is this area in northern Italy called Lombardy, which has a lot of buffalo. And buffalo farming is super hot up there, and that's where this cheese comes from. Buffalo milk is amazing. It's really exciting if you can find some. A buffalo milk cheese that you may have heard of is buffalo milk mozzarella. Actually, over in Italy, they just call buffalo milk mozzarella mozzarella. Here, we are more accustomed to more of a cow's milk profile, which is more rich and creamy and buttery. Buffalo milk cheeses like this are going to have a little bit of a tang to them, a little bit of a gaminess, if you will. And some of the reasons for that is because buffalo milk just happens to be higher in protein. A lot of that has to do with the fact that these buffaloes, when they don't have a tremendous milk yield. And when you're making cheese, milk yield is something that you want to think about. It's specifically the amount of milk that's going to come out of your animal in a day. So compared to a cow, a buffalo is going to produce a much smaller amount of milk in a day. So if you think about it, if that milk is meant to feed and nourish our little tiny itty bitty baby buffalo, we need it to be higher in protein, higher in butter fat, which is what makes our cheese creamy, buttery, rich, and amazing. So while other cheeses may have cream added to them to make them higher in butter fat, to make them more luscious, creamy, rich, this cheese kind of does it on its own because that's how the milk is made, which to me is a pretty magical thing. This cheese is going to go really well with anything Italian. If you can find a wine from this region of Italy, then it's party time. If you can, prosciutto, cured meats, I really like things like that. Salty things like nuts, sweet things like chocolate, all that is going to go great with this cheese. Really exciting, delicious cheese that not a lot of people know about, and I like it a lot. Buffalo are also, you're not going to see a ton of buffalo cheese coming out of America. Buffalo are really hard to farm. They tend to be a little bit temperamental, is what I've heard. And also, again, back to that milk yield, if you think about it, if you really want to be cranking out cheese in a way where you're going to sell it commercially, like these farms, that's their aim, you're going to need a lot of buffalo to crank out enough cheese to really make it worth it, or to compete with, let's say, a cow farm. So one of the issues that buffalo farmers are facing today in our modern world. Let's move on to another cheese that I want to tell you guys about. This is a 1605 Manchego. Manchego is probably a cheese that a lot of people know. Do we know Manchego? Can I get some nods? Yeah, I'm seeing some nods for Manchego. So Manchego is a pretty classic sheep's milk cheese. This comes from Spain. Any Manchego that you see is going to come from La Mancha. There's a PDO regulation, so in other words, there's rules and laws set in place that say how this cheese needs to be made, and one of those designates that it must be made from this specific region in Spain called Castilla-La Mancha. Manchego, as you guys already have known, it's a super popular cheese in this American market. People really like it, and you're going to see a bajillion different types of Manchegos out there. So you may be asking yourself, why this Manchego? Why the 1605? Also, what does 1605 even mean, which I will answer in a moment. This Manchego I really like. It's personally my favorite Manchego in the world because it's made in a very, very old world style, number one. This farm has been in operation since 1878, so kind of a minute. And they do everything in a really old world style, really slow and just really small batch, which I always think makes really great cheese. Another really great thing about this cheese is that if you look at the rind, so people who have had Manchegos before, they're probably noticing that this rind looks a little bit different. Most Manchegos that you see here in an American market tend to be coated in a darker color wax. So while wax is totally edible, especially if it's on your cheese, it's not the most, in my opinion, it doesn't enhance the flavor of the cheese so tremendously, and it doesn't really bring that much of a great texture. With this cheese, it's what we call a natural rind. So you can eat all of that rind, and in fact, it's going to bring some pretty great funky flavor into your cheese plate. And this also is made with raw milk. If we're cheese lovers here, people probably know what that means. When we're making cheese, there's a few different ways to treat our milk before it turns into cheese. And one of those, the biggest ways is it can either be pasteurized or raw. If you pasteurize cheese or pasteurize milk, it means you're heating it at a very high temperature. And the idea here is that you're cooking out any of the yucky bacteria that you might not want to pass from, say, an animal's udder onto your dinner plate. Unfortunately, a lot of the people in my industry are of the belief that it also cooks out a lot of really great nutrients that can actually be, number one, really healthy and excellent. If you think about, again, thinking about how a mommy sheep would be trying to bring past nutrients and keep her baby healthy and feeling good, we can actually benefit from a lot of those nutrients. And also, you're going to cook out a lot of the flavor and complexities in that milk. So one of the really exciting things about this 1605 Manchego is that it's made with that raw milk. So it's uncooked, unpasteurized. This comes out of our animal and it goes into a vat and it gets made into cheese. And all those incredible complexities are going to be able to be tasted on our palate, and we're going to have a really great time. This is also a farmstead cheese. Anytime you hear that term farmstead, first of all, it's a really great term for just cheese marketing purposes. It sounds really like farmy and like artisanal. People tend to like it. But in the cheese world, as a cheesemonger, when I hear the word farmstead, that means that the animals live, eat, sleep, hang out, and were milked on the exact same premises where the cheese is being made. So in the case of this cheese, this milk is just traveling probably just a matter of feet until it gets into the cheese make room, which is where we make our cheese. And so you can think about freshness and how excellent that's going to be by the time it's getting made. Why is it called 1605? One of the cool things about Manchego is that it's a really, really old recipe in this area of La Mancha, Spain. And it actually was written about in Don Quixote, which is obviously a very, very, very old text. And it came out in 1605. So to kind of celebrate that epic mention of this cheese that we still eat today in this piece of literature, these cheesemakers named their cheese after it, which I think is pretty cute. So if everybody's with me, I'm gonna move on to our next cheese here. This next one is called Compte, C-O-M-T-E. Has anybody had Compte before? No? Compte, she looks like this. This is a less squishy than the first one, but still pretty pliable when it gets to room temperature. It's a cow's milk cheese. One of the ways we can tell that is because it's a little bit yellowy. That's how I also know that these cows were eating grass, which is a great thing that I like to see. That's the beta carotene, which is a component in those green grasses that is visible in cow's milk. She's a little pliable and got a little squish to her. I can tell that it's gonna melt pretty nicely. Compte is one of our most classic Alpine style cheeses. Alpine cheeses are cheeses made obviously in the Alpine region. So we're in France right now. It's called the Jura region, a great place for wine. If you're looking to pair this cheese with wine, you can most likely find a wine from that same region and they're gonna pair together really nicely. It's a little rule about pairing. If things are from the same place, they tend to go well. And this Compte is an Alpine cheese. So we're by the border of those Swiss Alps, up high in the mountains, and these cows are grazing on these high alpine pastures, which are full of really rich, amazing greenery and flowers and all these lovely things. Compte is one of the coolest cheeses, and any cheesemonger can probably talk about Compte for like an hour to you. I will not do that tonight, but I will say a few things. Compte, so first of all, the cool thing about Compte is that these wheels are giant. We're talking about like 80-pound wheels. They're really, really large. I cannot lift them. I have tried. It's embarrassing, but I have to ask somebody for help when I have to lift them, but we won't talk about that. Compte is made to age. That's why they're so large. So this Compte specifically is aged by an affineur. Affineur is the name of the person who ages cheese. They practice the art of affinage, which is aging cheeses. So in other words, taking care of a cheese, monitoring the temperature, humidity, all the things happening around the cheese, the microbes popping up, and just creating the most perfect, beautiful environment to age a cheese. This guy's name is Marcel Petit. He is a very, very fancy, amazing French operation that has been running since like the 1800s. And it is based in an old World War II military fort. So it's pretty much the most French thing ever that here he was faced with these underground forts and he thought to himself, oh, we could make a cheese cave. And that's what he did. So you can picture these huge, expansive underground forts that are filled with these beautiful wheels of Compte. The cool thing about Compte is that most Compte starts as the same thing. The difference between multiple different Comptes, and there are many out there, is the age. So pretty much all these cheeses, the only thing that is changing their flavor, texture, any kind of levels of sass, profiles, whatever difference between them is their age, which to me is tremendously exciting because it shows the magic of this practice of affinage and this effect that taking care of cheese over time can have on kind of the same milk. As I said, this is a cow's milk cheese. It comes from a different consortium, so there's different farms around this affinage center, and they all kind of pool their milks together. Also, one of my favorite things about this cheese is that when they're made, when the wheels are made, it's not like they say, okay, these ones are going to be aged 12 months, these ones are going to be aged for 2 years, this one's going to be just 6 months. They have these expert affineurs, again, a person who ages cheese. They go around and they're tasting and sampling, and sometimes they'll even listen to, kind of knock on and just hear the sound inside of these wheels, and they can sense the characteristics that are going to come out of the cheese in the long run, and that's how they decide who's going to stick around for 12 months, 2 years, 6 months, 3 months, whatever it may be, which to me is really funny. And also, in addition to that, they categorize them by these like really dramatic emotional names. So this one is a younger one that I have in front of me, and it goes by Fleur or Melody. And an older one is known as Symphony. It's just like really French, really dramatic, like emotional terms for cheese. And I also have a lot of emotions about my cheese, so I get it. So that's Compte. Compte is a really super pairable cheese. It is going to be great for melting if it's a younger one. Over the course of time, also, older Comptes can gather these little crunchy bits in them. Has anybody ever had a little crunchy bit in some aged cheese? We love it, right? It's the best. People love those. They're called tyrosine crystals. And what it is it's just an assembly of protein molecules. They kind of clump together over time. If you're looking for tyrosine crystals, you probably look for a cheese that's 12 months or over. So when a cheese gets to that point, kind of when a lot of cheese aging is we're talking about moisture wicking away and moisture falling away. And when that moisture falls away, it gives way for some of these molecules to clump together and create these little crunchy bits, which to me are like cheese diamonds. And people love them. Oh my God. When people used to come to my counter and just demand diamond cheese, and I would give it to them. So Compte is great. To me, it's a really, really classic, really excellent French cheese. And the cool thing about Compte is that in France, they eat it like we eat like yellow cheddar. It's the most consumed cheese over there, which to me is really nice because it's a really great cheese. So keep a lookout for Compte on menus. If you're unsure of the name or what it means, remember that the only difference between that Compte and a Compte on another menu is the age. So feel free to ask your monger, your server at a restaurant. I'm always this guy, I'm always doing it. How old is the Compte? And that's going to give you some insight as to how dry it is. As these Comptes get older, they get a little drier, they get a little firmer, and those crystals are going to appear. So if you're like me and you hear them say it's 12 months or over, I'm going to order that Compte. Sound good? We got one last cheese. I'm moving through these quick. Okay, so this last one, as we saw on the list, is this Pantaleo. Can we see her? It's drier. So unlike these other cheeses, it doesn't quite peel like that. It crumbles. It's a little drier. Also, the bright white of this cheese lets us know that it's a goat's milk cheese. So remember how I talked about that beta carotene in the cow's milk? So it's a long sciencey story, but goats digest their beta carotene differently in a way where it doesn't appear in the color of their milk. So that's why there's a little trick for you. If you see a cheese that's bright, bright white, chances are it's a goat's milk cheese. This one comes from Sardinia, which is an island off of Italy. And the vibe here, it's a beachy vibe. There's resorts, there's beaches, there's people vacationing, and kind of that vibe of this like islandiness, to me, infuses a lot of the cheese there. It's got a lot of salinity, which is a fancy word for salty. These flavors are really bright and crisp, super noticeable. This one in particular is pretty strong. To me, I really like this cheese, and I like to think of it as a pecorino alternative. We know pecorinos, everybody like pecorinos here. They're great for pretty strong, salty sheep's milk cheese. That's really good for like grating on pasta. Cacio e pepe is a classic pasta dish that has pecorino in it. I like to think of this as a pecorino alternative just because it's like cool. A lot of people don't know about these aged goat's milk cheese. A lot of people think that goat's milk is just that like fluffy, crumbly thing, which we call chev. But actually there's an amazing world of goat cheese, and people are doing all kinds of crazy things with goat's milk, and this is one of them. Pantaleo, I really like the flavor. It's going to be, in addition to the saltiness, there's a lemoniness and a pepperiness. To me, it almost feels like there's black pepper running throughout this cheese, even though there's not, which is really magical and amazing, the beauty of milk. And also, one of the crazy things about this cheese is that, so being a monger, we face a lot of situations where people will give us pairing almost challenges. And I have had people ask me a number of times, listen, I know I'm breaking all the rules, don't call the police, but what cheese can I pair with my seafood tonight? And because of those islandy vibes that this cheese is rocking, and the lemoniness, the salinity, which again means salty, this cheese is going to pair actually really weirdly well with a lot of seafood. I know it's like a crazy thing and people think it's like breaking a rule, but in my life, cheese goes with everything. So here's an example where I think this cheese goes really well with seafood. Try it out. It's a really great Sardinian cheese called Pantaleo. Lemony, peppery, super strong, salty, goat's milk. And this whole world of hard goat's milk, I'm gonna say it again, think about checking it out next time you're at a cheese counter. People really don't know about it, and people think that it sounds strange, but once you try it, it's actually really, really tasty and really, really excellent. I love harder goat's cheeses. So that's all the cheese that I have to present. I have some chats here. I'm gonna open them up and see if people have some questions. So yeah, if anybody has questions, feel free to post them in the chat. I'm going to start answering them. Kendall is asking, curious if you know which animal milk cheeses have no low lactose levels. Lactose question, I love it. So lactose, as we know, is the sugar component of milk. And there are some cheeses that are lower in lactose, and there's a lot of cheeses, and cheese people and friends, some that I know are here in this Zoom with us who maybe have a harder time digesting lactose. So this is a great question that I love to answer. And there actually are cheeses that are lower in lactose. So the first one is goat's milk. Goat's milk is naturally lower in lactose. It's just going to be easier on your tummy. Those lactose molecules, actually, the like globules in the milk are smaller. And so it's easier for your tum-tum to digest them if your tum-tum has a harder time with that. Another great way to avoid lactose in cheese is, in addition to, sorry, I said tum-tum, in addition to drying happening when your cheese is getting aged, also the lactose begins to break down. So aged cheeses are gonna be also naturally lower in lactose. And so if you can find an aged goat's milk cheese, let's get weird, that's gonna be great. So that's what I would say to look for if you have a hard time with lactose. Also, I'm always saying this, talk to your monger, ask your monger, go to a monger that you know and trust, and that's a question that we get all the time. No one's gonna like laugh you out of the room. It's really actually an amazing moment where we get to bring cheese into the lives of people who think they can't eat cheese, which is the saddest thing in the world. What else do we have? Can you talk about Brie and how to select one? I would love to. So Brie is a classic soft French cheese. Here in this country, people tend to think of Brie as any soft cheese. Brie is actually a specific type of cheese. It comes from a certain region. And the Bries that French people think of as Bries and that us mongers think of as Bries, they're creamy and they're soft and they're spreadable, but they actually have a mushroomy flavor and earthiness to them, an almost vegetal flavor, which vegetal means it reminds us of like green vegetables like broccoli or something like that. So Bries that a lot of people that are technically Bries tend to have some of those vegetable notes. So when people like Bries and like softer cheeses, I'm always encouraging them to try stuff like that because it's really fun and really interesting. It's much more savory. Also, in this world of cheese, we have things that are known as double creams and triple creams. So these are soft cheeses that have been enhanced with cream to make them higher in butter fat. Remember how I talked about how the buffalo milk kind of does it on its own? So these are cheeses that have been enhanced with cream from a cow to make them more lush, more buttery, more rich. And they're great. Oh my God, they're delicious. They're like super rich, luscious. They go really well with sparkly wines, champagnes and stuff like that. So with Brie, I encourage people to try Bries that are like from France. Like if you see a Normandy Brie, Brie de Meaux, M-E-A-U-X is my favorite Brie. Again, it has a little bit of those mushroomy vegetal, broccoli soup notes, but it's really exciting, really complex, and really delicious. If you are into the more creamy, buttery, rich, friendly Bries, or what we think of as Bries, my tip-top favorite one, I shouldn't recommend the American one because we're in an international cheeses class, but Briat Severin is a really excellent French one. They come in these like really cute wheels that are like a pound. They're like that big, but your monger can most likely cut them into quarters or halves. And it's just really rich and really lovely. And it's just, to me, like that's like the purest, most buttery, and it's got a little bit of grassiness, but not too much. It's just like a really lovely, friendly is a word that I think of those cheeses as being. Is just like anybody can like them. They're lush, they're luxurious. it's just like a good time, you know? So Briat Severin, BRILLAT dash SAVARIN, Briat Severin. It's named after a dude. Okay. Does the Pantaleo have the same bite that other goat cheeses have? I would say so, but I would say it's different. So other goat cheeses, when I think of that goat cheese bite, to me it's like a tang, right? It's like a yogurty like zip. It's like a lemony, like whoop, like that kind of a thing. And I would say so. That's definitely a mark of goat's milk cheeses. Though this one also has a lot of like that saltiness to back it up, and even that pepperiness because it's so aged. That one's a little bit older. It's like 6 months, which is a lot for goat cheese. So yeah, it totally has that same like bite, that zip, that like hi, how you doing, that goat cheese has, which I love. But it's got a lot more going on too. And that's not one that I would recommend melting. Because again, when we're talking about that age, we're talking about that drying. So if you look at this like dry cheese, it's not gonna like melt very well. So I would think of this as like an eating table cheese with honey or seafood. Okay, what else do we have? Ah, Jen. Yes, oh my God. Okay, Jen has a question about seasonality in cheese. Goat Rodeo is a really awesome farm. And there's this cheese from them that she likes, but it is made with summer and spring milk. Season absolutely plays a part in cheeses, especially depending on the breed of animal that we're getting the milk from. So when we're talking about like more aged cow's milk cheeses, there's actually versions of this Compte that come out only certain times of the year. And that's just because they're made in small batches. So they can't be like making them all the time, specifically because they're so aged. So it's like hard to keep a really old cheese around. It just like takes up space in the cave. So those are gonna come out in November, December. And probably November, December is like, because that's when everybody's doing their like holiday shopping. So that's when like a lot of cheeses come out. And a lot of cheeses are available only in that time. So if we're talking about seasonality in that sense of like, when can I get the most special cheeses? November, December is when the best ones are available. And those are really exciting because they tend to be, they're so different every year. So like, those are the cheeses. Vacherin Mont d'Or is one. Compte Sagesse is the name of the Compte that comes out that's extra aged then. Sagesse is French for like a wise woman, like again, like a dramatic emotional name. But so that's gonna come out in December. So December is a great time to be shopping for cheese. In terms of goat's milk and in terms of flavor in cheeses specifically, spring and summer is the great time. And that's just because that's when the goats are, they call it kidding. Everybody knows that a baby goat is called a kid. So when goats are in their season, when they're having their babies, they're making kids, they call it kidding. So, and that happens in the springtime. So if you think about it, again, thinking back to the purpose of our milk, it's to feed these itty bitty babies. And so that mama goat's best milk production is gonna be in the spring and summer when her brand new little kids need it badly. So that is why this goat cheese is best or only available all around the spring and summertime, because that's when those milks are the freshest and most full of nutrients and they're grazing. Also, like in the spring, like all these amazing flowers are growing and the grasses are really rich and lush. And so your animal is eating that, and that's gonna, all those nutrients are gonna go into their milk. So it's gonna be extra tasty. Marla asked a question. What is my fave cheese to pair with red wine? What is my fave? Oh my God, that's a big question. Honestly, I'd hate to like stay so like on topic, but this Compte is like probably the most friendly red wine cheese. You can see people holding their red wine. But this Compte, yeah, so if you can find a Compte that's got a little age on it, it's just gonna go so well with a lot of these red wines, especially like a mid-range red, so that it's not gonna blow, you know, the flavor of your wine out the window. but something, or the flavor of your cheese. So just like something that's gonna just like be kind of middle of the road and just kind of like meet your cheese where it's at, and it's gonna play off of that. So this Compte, I guess I didn't talk much about the flavor, but it has some like nuttiness to it and some fruity notes that almost remind me of like a grilled peach. So like that toastiness and fruitiness. So if you can find like a sweet-ish, but not too sweet red, that's gonna go really well. But with red wine, I would just say firmer cheeses, because they tend to be a little bit stronger, and so they're gonna hold up to that red. I would also say, and the trick is always look at something that is from the same region. So like a Rioja might go really well with like something Spanish, like a Manchego. So that's like a little trick. If you know where your cheese is coming from, if you find a wine from the same place, it's probably gonna go well. But the real answer is just try everything. It's all good. It's, you know, when it comes to pairing, there's no like hard and fast rules. Like everything should be eaten with everything and everything should be enjoyed. So I would always say try around, see what works for you, and get down with your cheese and your wine. Other questions? Harry. Hi, Harry. What are the most underrated cheeses? That's a good question. I would say, honestly, this Pantaleo is definitely on my list. That's kind of why I'm teaching it, is because I want to like bring more attention to it. And just this style of hard Italian goat's milk cheeses. Everybody loves a pecorino, you know, if you're making a pasta, you're like turning to a pecorino. And I just want to push people to think of like other animals' milks for that same purpose. That's a super underrated cheese. What's another good underrated cheese? There's a cheese called Hornbacher, which I really love. If I can just like drop some weird names here. Hornbacher. It's an Alpine style cheese, so the same style as this Compte, but from a different part of Switzerland, or from Switzerland, not France. And it's just really wacky. It is kind of oniony and almost has like some roasted garlic notes to me. It's just like deeply savory. Like everybody likes to throw the word umami around, and to me that's just like definish umami, and I love that. And it's an Alpine style cheese, so on most cheese counters, this Alpine category, it's pretty vast. There's a lot of great Alpine cheeses out there, so those ones like Hornbacher and other smaller producer ones are good, kind of just get lost in it, but it's a cheese I really like. If you guys see it, it's imported through Gourmino, so if you just head to their website, I'm sure you can get it through them. But it's a really cool, really weird cheese that nobody really knows about. It's one of those cheeses that like when it arrives at the cheese counter, kind of like all the mongers get excited, but like the people at the counter are like, what, how do you pronounce that? You know what I mean? But we're all like, ah, and so that's one of those cheeses. So I have fond memories about it. Leah has a question. What is a good starter stinky cheese for a baby palate? We love baby palates. That's where we all started. And I think it's cool that if you have a baby palate, you're asking about stinkers. That's a great place to start. I would think, so there's a woman named Liz Thorpe, and she wrote a book about cheese, and she kind of coined the term gateway cheeses. So cheeses that can kind of open a door to more challenging flavors. And I mean, stinky cheese is like the perfect place to talk about this, because obviously really intimidating, really scary, really stinky realm of food. And there are cheeses that are less stinky, which we think of as gateway cheeses, which are kind of, you know, made for your baby palate, which is a good way to get into this world. So the most classic, baby palate gateway stinky cheese is a cheese called Taleggio. When we think about stinky cheese, we're talking about this family of cheeses called washed rinds. So they're cheeses where the whole wheel gets washed with a brine or a booze or something to kind of keep the outside of it wet, and it starts to stink a little bit. A lot of the times these stinkers, their bark is much worse than their bite. In other words, they stink a lot more than they actually taste. It's amazing how often I ask people to just like hold their nose while it gets into their mouth, and then they're like, oh my God, it's not that bad. And I'm like, hurtful for somebody who likes that cheese, but yes, like, and Taleggio is a cheese that It's not too wild on the stinky front. On the palate, it's really creamy and delicious. It's a great melter. In fact, a lot of people put it on pizza. It's an Italian cheese. And that's kind of the classic starter for people who are just trying to get into stinky cheese. But I guess that's my message for the baby palate who is starting to think about stinkier cheeses is maybe don't trust your nose on everything. Maybe it's not as intense once it gets on your palate. There's actually a lot of other things going on other than just like this, like, you know, footy smell. I love getting to describe things as footy. And there's a lot more going on. There's like other cool flavors, and sometimes they can be really creamy and friendly once you can get past the stink. But Taleggio is a really good one. Oma is another good one. That's a domestic one made in Vermont. OMA, it means grandmother in German. That creamery, they made it for their grandma. And it's a smaller wheel, and it's cow's milk. It's creamy on the inside. It's funky on the rind. Like, it's got some funk, but if you can get it past your lips, it's creamy, buttery, another great melter. So I would check out the Oma and the Taleggio. Amanda has a question. Thanks for your question, Amanda. Best type of cheese to pair with coffee? What a great question. Coffee, people don't think of coffee as being a good cheese pair, but it actually really works. We were just talking about stinky cheese. Actually, there's a lot of stinky cheese that I really like with coffee. That funk tends to like really be like tampered down by the like bitiness of coffee. There's a cheese called Grayson, which is made seasonally in Virginia. Another seasonal one. You can only get this one around springtime because they only want to make it when their cows are grazing on the best pastures. Remember we talked about like seasonality and grasses. So that's an example of that. Actually, when this one time I was working this cheese job and I had a cup of coffee and I didn't have any other breakfast, and we had this fridge where we just kept cheeses that we had just photographed, and we just happened to have some Grayson, and I tried it and it was like so good. It was like, and then everybody in the office had to try it too. But so Grayson is a really great one, again, because that funk is so strong, it is able to like meet that bitterness of the coffee so well, and then the creaminess is going to come out, and then that's going to kind of like be your almost like your creamer. It's just really delicious. Another really great way to eat cheese and coffee is to eat blue cheese. Again, so much of pairing is just thinking about strength in terms of like intensity of flavor, and here's a really, really strong cheese that is going to not get completely swallowed up by this really, really, really strong, you know, bitter, roasty flavor, and it goes really well, especially the sweeter blues. A lot of blues are sweeter, and it kind of creates this effect where it's almost like the coffee is like almost like chocolatey water, and then it has like a bitter chocolate vibe, and then the sweetness of the blue almost sweetens it, and then the creaminess of the blue makes it feel more creamy. So I would definitely think about coffee and blue cheese. It's a really, really exciting and cool and weird pairing if you like are thinking about blue cheese at the same time you're thinking about coffee, which is like, I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with me, but that's my advice. Thank you for your question. Great question. What temperature should you serve cheese? Jillian, great question. I love this question. So as everybody knows, the best way to keep most of our cheeses is in the fridge, and that is to, you know, prevent a whole bunch of weird things from growing on them. When you are serving cheese, I always recommend that you keep cheese out of the fridge for around 45 minutes. The best temperature to serve your cheese is room temperature, and that's our best way to accomplish that, is to let it sit out of the fridge a little bit. So usually whenever I teach classes, I always have to email the host or email everybody and say, hey, I know it's weird, but can you ask your guests to let the cheese sit out of the fridge for a good 45 minutes before class starts? And the reason for that is because cheeses are complex. There's a lot of flavors going along. There's a lot of like really incredible things happening, and you want to be able to taste all of them. And the best way to taste and get to know all of these flavors is if it's the same temperature that your tongue is. Sorry to talk about your tongue. But if you think about it as the opposite of like an icky beer, I think all of us may have had college experiences where we were drinking like a really disgusting beer and you wanted it really cold, right? You wanted it like icy cold. And the reason for that is that you didn't really taste it. So if you think about it, cheese, this delicious, complex, expensive delight, you're going to want to taste all of that, enjoy all of that. And so it's the opposite. You want it to be room temperature so that your palate can like get to know and understand everything that it's tasting. So I would always say room temperature. Kendall has a question. Why is cheese in France so stinky? Yeah, okay. Why is cheese in France so stinky? I was warned by friends when I went to Paris, so I ordered Brie thinking it was safe, and it smelled so bad. I'm sorry about your stinky cheese experience. I hope it won't. Clearly, it hasn't turned you off cheese completely since you're here, so great work getting back on the horse. And so part of that is because French really know what they're doing, and so they're always going to be serving their cheese at that room temperature, which we just talked about. And so just like the flavors, all of the aromas, I was going to say stinks, but I stopped myself. All of the pleasant, delightful, beautiful aromas are also emanating freely from that cheese when they're room temperature. Also, this goes back to what we were saying about Bries before, where a lot of us Americans tend to think that Bries are these creamy, buttery, mild things, when in fact, those are kind of cheeses that have been, it's a riff on Brie that's been created mostly for an American palate, where it's had a lot of that cream added to it. So it's gonna be creamy, buttery, mild, all those nice, friendly things, where in France, like I mentioned, the Brie de Meaux and other things like that, they actually have much more of a vegetally vibe, and they have those mushroomy, earthy notes, which are going to be more apparent in a stinky way. But again, like I said, stink does not always mean funky, icky foot flavor. So the next time you're in Paris, I would encourage you to just try it anyways, and maybe the taste is not as wild as the smell. And that's a good example of that. Barbara and Maury. Hello, Barbara and Maury. Thanks for joining us. Would you recommend the Pantaleo to be grated for pasta, salads? Absolutely. Oh, yeah. One of the things that I really like to grate Pantaleo on is asparagus, like a grilled asparagus. If you're like into grilling, I don't know. But because it has that lemoniness, that pepperiness. I like to put it on roasted veggies like that. Pantaleo, again, like put it on like, get weird, like put it on like a salmon. Try it, I don't know. One time I had a customer tell me that he was looking for a cheese to pair with oysters. And I gave him Pantaleo and he came back and he loved it. I know, it's weird. But if you think about it, that's that like, that bright, zippy lemoniness that's gonna like pair well with your seafood. But totally, I would definitely do it on pastas. Oh my God, salads would be great, like a nice like summery salad moment. Even with like a balsamic dressing would be great. But yeah, the Pantaleo is great. The other thing that I love about Pantaleo, which it's kind of tacky, but it's not very expensive. So it's one of my favorite cheeses to let people know about, because cheese doesn't have to be crazy expensive to be really, really good. On the counter that I used to work at here on the East Coast, it was one of our cheapest cheeses, but one of the cheeses that me and the mongers got most excited about. So check out Pantaleo. It's a great grating cheese for sure. Ooh, a recommendation of a hard and soft cheese with veggie rennet. So rennet. For anybody that doesn't know, when our milk turns to a solid curd in the cheese making process, it's done so by an enzyme called rennet. So rennet can be made with multiple things. One of the most common is it's extracted from the animal's stomach. So it's kind of the same enzyme that is breaking down the milk in a baby cow's tummy, is used to turn our liquid milk into solid curd. And that's the most common way that it's made. There's also rennets that come from vegetables, and very rare. And then more common than that, there are rennets that are made in a lab. So things that are friendly for vegetarians to eat. My favorite hard cheese that is made with veggie rennet is Midnight Moon. It's made in Holland, but imported through Cypress Grove, which is a farm in California, a cheese company in California. And it is a goat's milk Gouda. So it's going to be great for people who have a harder time with lactose because it's a little more aged and it's got goat's milk. So it starts out with lower lactose and then it's got some time for that lactose to kind of break down. And it is, I taught a class last night and somebody told me that she recently started buying it and she was like, it's like crack, I can't stop. And I was like, get into it. It's really tasty. It's really snackable because it's quite sweet. So Goudas are, anytime you see Gouda, think sweetness. Goudas tend to be sweeter cheeses. It has to do with some things that happen during the cheese making process, which I can talk about during our Gouda class, which doesn't exist yet, but maybe it will because I just mentioned it. And it's made with goat's milk, so it's got a little bit of that tang. And it's made with vegetarian rennet. If I'm not mistaken, rennet, it's microbial, which is what we call rennet that's made in a lab. So that's a good hard one. And then a really cool soft cheese that I like that's made with vegetarian rennet is, God, I gotta think of one. So before I mentioned rennet that can be extracted from vegetables and plants, one of the places that this happens is in Portugal. So Portugal actually has a lot of these cheeses called Thistle rennet cheeses. So the cardoon thistle, the stamen of this plant, when you boil it and make almost like a tea, it works as our rennet. So that's our vegetarian vegetable rennet. So if you see a thistle rennet cheese, they're super rare, but that is vegetarian. My favorite one is called Avea Montegatto. Oh my God, Ovelha Montegatto. And if you search it, you'll find it. But it's weird. These thistle rennet cheeses, I don't know if it's something happening with the thistle, something happening with this rennet style, but there's a distinct lemoniness and a funkiness. And a fruitiness, like a ripe peach, or like a piece of like a grilled lemon maybe. They're really, to me, they're like summer cheeses. They're intense. They tend to almost always be made with sheep's milk also. I think there's something with thistle rennet and sheep's milk. I think they work better together. So, because most of the thistle rennet cheeses that I've seen are made with sheep. So I would say check those out. Ovea Montegatto, it's super weird, but it's really cool if you can get into it. It's almost like sour, like it's like really zippy. Like it reminds me of like lemonade on like a summer day. And it's super goopy. If it's ripe, you can just like smear it right on bread, and I like it a lot. So those are two veggie rennet cheeses. What else do we have? California has some small production cheesemakers. Are there any that you are familiar with that you would suggest? Cypress Grove, I mentioned earlier, they're amazing. Cowgirl Creamery is a queer women-owned cheese company that I really like. They have a triple cream called Mount Tam, which is really great. Who else is in California? Point Reyes, you've probably heard of. They're getting kind of big now. They have a blue that I really like called, they have a couple blues, but my favorite one is Bay Blue. Who else is in California? Does Oregon count? It's kind of nearby. Rogue Creamery is in Oregon. They make this crazy cheese called Rogue River Blue, which last year was named the best cheese in the world. It's the first time that an American cheese has won that title in a national competition, which is pretty dope. Who else is in California? They need your help right now, honestly. If that's something that you're thinking, California is a great place to be supporting right now, because I'm just seeing some really sad things happening at these farms. That's a good list, right? Yeah, Point Reyes, Cowgirl, Cypress Grove. DM me on Instagram and I'll think of more between now and then. But yeah. Barb and Maury with another zinger here. What do you think of having cheese? What do you think of having cheese before dinner versus after dinner, as in France? I know the answer is whenever you like, but what do you prefer? I'm glad that you know the answer is whenever you like, because that's the first thing that I'm going to say. Cheese all day is the right answer. I think it depends on the meal. I think it depends on the cheese. Honestly, I think that I have been in situations where I served a great cheese plate before the meal, and then no one was full everyone was full and didn't want to eat the meal. And then I've had vice versa, where cheese was neglected because everybody was so full by the end of the meal that it was kind of an afterthought. I would say it depends on your cheese. I think if you're having stronger, more intense cheeses, then it's better for after the meal. And then people can kind of like, it'll be like their last farewell bite. Also, I think it's nice at the end of a meal to put out like one or two pieces of cheese. If it's before the meal, then I think it's nice to have like a bigger plate with like a bunch of cheeses. That way people can just like take a little bite. I also feel like after the meal is like a really excellent opportunity for like a really mind-blowing cheese pairing. If you can like set up a pairing and almost that's your, dessert, like a great blue cheese with some gorgeous honey, or, a grilled peach over a burrata that feels like more of a meal. So maybe I would do that before. Like, I just think it all depends on the cheese and what you're eating. Like, is this a fish meal? Do I want to is it super light? And so I'll have lots of room afterwards. Then I would go harder with the after meal plate. I think it just all depends. Depends on the time, are you going to be cooking for a really long time and you want people to be sitting there nibbling on something? A blue, if we're talking blue cheese, I definitely want to see that after the meal, because that's so strong. Your palate, there's some things that can happen in your palate where it gets blown out if you have a flavor that's too strong, and then you'll won't be able to taste other things. So if it's something really strong like a blue, I would think about it for after the meal. But I think there's no wrong answers, and I just think it's all about curating your meal in a broader sense. And I mean, what we're talking about is curating these people's evenings, when we're talking about serving a dinner. It depends on the vibe of the night, what you want to do. But I like the thought you're giving into this, Maury, and I think it's good, because the thing that I don't like at a dinner party is cheese being an afterthought, cheese being on the side table, getting neglected. I like thinking of it as a meal before or after, and I especially like it being part of the meal, that pantaleo on your asparagus. Great question, thank you. Kendall says, I love Shropshire blue. Yeah, but sometimes the blue is a bit too strong. Are there other cheeses with a similar flavor / made orange as the Shropshire? I'm curious to what you like about the orange. Orange cheeses most likely are made with a dye called annatto. It's a totally cool dye. It's actually natural. It comes from a seed. It's like a ground up seed, and then it turns our cheese orange. It is most typically doesn't really bring any flavor to our cheese. It's actually something that's added it's a long story, but it was added first for marketing purposes, just to kind of set cheese apart in a case, and now it's done for a multitude of reasons. In the case of that Shropshire, it's just that's a really old, for people who don't know Shropshire, it's a really classic blue cheese from this specific town in England. So it's kind of the food mascot of that town. And so they're gonna just do it the way that they've always done it, and that's always involved adding this annatto flavoring. If that one is strong for you, so that cheese is really similar to Stilton. Some people would argue that it is a annatto dyed Stilton, but I do find Stilton's generally to be a little bit creamier and a little bit more friendly. I would just explore that blue category. So a lot of people think that there's just a few blue cheeses, and even more heartbreaking, people think that there's just one blue cheese. So blue cheese is actually a vast umbrella that many, many types of cheeses sit under. So I would just start talking to your monger and let them know that you're looking for something that's a little bit more friendly. You like the Shropshire, but you want something with a little bit more friendliness. Creaminess is a good word to throw out there. The Stilton I would recommend for you. I would also recommend a cheese that I really like that is similar to the Shropshire but a little bit more creamy is I would try that Bay Blue that I mentioned by Point Reyes, which is made in California. They also have another one called, it's their original blue. So if you'll see it in a cheese counter, it'll either be called Point Reyes blue or Point Reyes original blue. It's kind of their like, just like original, you know, blue cheese recipe. It's really similar to Maytag, if anybody knows Maytag, but it's a cheese, it's gonna be similar to the Shropshire in that it has like some pretty intense blue flavor, but there's like creaminess to it, and it's gonna make it a little bit more approachable and less kind of like blow your palate away. But talk to your monger, that's a great thing to tell them, and that's gonna change depending on what counter you're at. So I would just, you know, let them know your concern. What cheese did I say was the best in the world last year? Okay, so Rogue River Blue. The creamery is in Oregon, it's called Rogue Creamery. And Rogue River Blue, remember how I talked about how some of the best cheeses in the world only come out in November and December? This is one of those. So if you see that your local counter is gonna have it, hop on it, because like the fact that it's seasonal and now has won this award, like last year, I could not keep it in stock. It's like, there might be a wait list, so I would maybe start talking to your monger about it now. But it's a really excellent blue cheese, kind of mid-range in terms of creaminess. And then it is wrapped, get ready for this, it's wrapped in grape leaves that have been soaked in a pear brandy that they also make on the premises. It sounds really boozy, but it actually brings a lot more sweetness than you're expecting. It's a really, really delicious cheese, and it's just gorgeous because it's wrapped in those booze-soaked leaves, and so it looks really great on a plate. It's really striking, and it's this like famous American cheese now, which is really cool. So there are these like competitions where people can, you know, present their cheeses and then be judged, and there's this world competition, this world cheese competition, and historically American cheeses have never won, and that happened last year, which is insane, and says everything that you need to know about cheese, the cheese scene in America, and that we're really coming up. So check out the Rogue River Blue. It's really excellent. It's going to be available. I know a couple counters have it now. It's in October. It's going to start to kind of trickle out. In November, you can definitely get it if it's not sold out. And then December, if it's not sold out. Last year was when they won, and I got a lot of it, and I sold out. Like we were done by December. So I would talk to your monger now if it's something you're trying to get your hands on. Is there any cheese that I don't like? Yeah, there is. I don't like cheese that, I like cheese that tastes like cheese. Me and most mongers would probably agree that I get upset when I see like a cheese that's packed with like some crazy flavor. There's a cheese called Red Lion, which drives me insane because it is, sorry if anybody here likes Red Lion, but it's a really, really mild cheese that is packed full. We're talking like packed, like they're touching with mustard seeds. And so it's like not, like, I don't know how you can call that cheese at that point. Like so I guess I'm just more offended at that, but so cheese that doesn't taste like cheese. So cheese that is kind of just used as a vehicle to like pack in another flavor makes me sad. If I'm approaching a cheese, cheese plate, if I'm here, at the beginning of Maury's meal or at the end of Maury's meal, whichever he decides, if I'm at a cheese plate, I want to taste cheese. I want to taste like expertly fermented milk product. And if I see too many things like jammed into my cheese to the point where I can't actually taste the milk, it's just going to make me sad. All right, I think I'm getting to the end of it. Thanks for coming, everybody. Thanks, Anne, that's sweet. All right, I think we're probably signing off. Yeah, that's what it seems like. All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming.